What remained? There is a photograph from the morning of the third day. You have seen it described. You know what it shows. What it shows has not changed in 50 years. The shape in the tree line behind Dee's right shoulder is upright. It is the height of the shape Ray saw in the birch stand. It is the height of the shape that held the border of the firelight. It is approximately the height of the shape that stood at the south edge of camp in the last hours of the last night and watched the four men sitting at the fire while Dee and Ray watched it from their chairs and said nothing. 4 men came home from Osceola County in November of 1973. Ray stopped hunting. Not that season. He never hunted again. He sold his rifles in 1974 and has not been to the woods overnight since. He is not ashamed of this. He says there is no version of the woods that is just the woods anymore. He says it is not a place he can go and be purely present. There is always something else in it now. 4 men at the edge of the tree line. First light. The kind of pale, flat November light that makes everything look like it's already over. They're standing shoulder to shoulder the way hunting parties stand when someone says, "Get together, I'll take one." They are grinning. They have done this before. The rifles are grounded, barrels down, the posture of men who are comfortable with what they're carrying. And on the far right, closest to the tree line, Dee, who has never spoken publicly about what happened on this trip and whose family has asked that we use only the initial. This is what happened in the 4 days before that photograph was taken. They had been doing this trip for 12 years. That matters. It matters more than anything else in this account, because the whole story turns on familiarity, on 4 men who knew this land and knew each other and knew exactly what normal looked like here. Normal was the drive north from Flint on a Wednesday, Carl's truck pulling Ray's trailer, Gord asleep in the back before they hit 127. Normal was the same camp in the same clearing off the same 2-track, the one they'd found in 61 and never told another person about. Normal was 4 days, 4 rifles, the same arguments about the same things, the same fire, the same whiskey. Normal was known. Normal was safe. They were not men who frightened easily, and they had never had reason to be. Here is who they were. Ray Kowalski was 44 years old, a machinist from Flint, who had been hunting since he was old enough to carry a rifle and had been hunting with Carl since they were teenagers. Ray was the group's skeptic, the one who pushed back on everything until the evidence was undeniable, the one who wanted the practical explanation first and would accept no other until it failed. His wife called this stubbornness. Ray called it precision. In this account, it is the quality that will matter most, and it will not save him. Gord Belisle was 39, a high school shop teacher, the shortest man in the group, and the best shot by a margin that embarrassed the others. Gord was the group's mood. When Gord was easy, the camp was easy. When Gord went quiet, you noticed. He had a wife and 2 daughters and a dog named after a baseball player, and he liked these trips because for 4 days, he was not responsible for anyone except himself. He would later describe the third night as the moment he understood that some things cannot be outshot. Carl Dempsey was 46, who had organized every one of these trips since the first one. Carl knew this land the way a person knows the layout of their childhood home. In the dark, by feel without thinking. He knew which ridgeline the deer crossed at first light and which creek the bucks watered at in the afternoon. He was not a complicated man. He believed in what he could put his hands on. He had put his hands on every inch of this land, and he knew what belonged here and what didn't. This knowledge, which had always been an asset, would become the thing that broke him. And then there was D.D. was 41, a factory foreman, the quietest member of the group, in the way that some people are quiet, and not because they have nothing to say, but because they are always watching and processing and arriving at conclusions the others haven't reached yet. In 12 years of these trips, he had never been the first one out of his sleeping bag or the last one to bed. He was exactly on time for everything. The others found this funny and also in some unspoken way reassuring. They left Flint on the morning of November 12th, 1973. On the second morning at first light, Ray and Dee went east along the ridge. Carl and Gord went north toward the creek. And that is when it started. Ray saw it first. He has never disputed this. In every account he has given in the decades since, 3 recorded interviews across 30 years, and 1 letter written in 1991 to a researcher he trusted. He is consistent on this point. He saw it first, on the second morning at approximately 7:15, in the birch stand on the east side of the ridge. He saw it and he stood very still and he processed what he was seeing with the particular attention of a man who has spent a lifetime in the woods and understands what belongs in them. What he saw was this: a shape at the far end of the birch stand, approximately 80 yards out, standing upright against a birch trunk, the way a man will stand against a tree to break his silhouette when he doesn't want to be seen. The shape was tall. Ray estimated 7 feet at the shoulder, maybe more, though he acknowledges that distance and adrenaline affect these estimates, and he has tried over the years to be precise rather than dramatic. It was tall, it was broad, and it was standing on 2 legs against a birch tree, watching him with a quality of stillness that excluded every animal Ray had ever encountered in the woods. Animals don't hold still like that. Animals are always processing, always shifting weight, always orienting to sound and wind. What Ray was looking at was holding still the way a person holds still when they have decided to hold still. It was a choice. The stillness was deliberate. Ray stood with his rifle at low ready and he looked at it for what he estimates was 45 seconds. Maybe a minute. He did not raise the rifle. He will tell you he does not know why he did not raise the rifle. He is a man who has raised a rifle at things for 40 years, and he did not raise it at this. He says the thought did not occur to him. He says the situation did not feel like a situation where the rifle was the answer. He is still not sure what that means about what he understood in some part of his body below language that he was looking at. Dee was 20 feet to Ray's left, slightly behind him on the ridge. Ray did not signal to Dee. He did not speak. He stood and he looked, and then the shape at the birch tree turned. Not quickly, not startled, deliberately, like a person turning to leave a conversation, and it moved into the trees. It did not crash, it did not run. It walked into the birch stand, and the birch stand received it, and it was gone. Ray stood there another 30 seconds. Then he turned to Dee, was looking at the birch stand. Dee had an expression on his face that Ray had never seen there in 12 years. Ray said, "You see that?" Dee, "Yeah." They stood in silence for another moment. Then Ray, "Big bear." Dee looked at him. Dee didn't say anything. Ray said it again, quieter. "Big bear, that's all." Dee turned back to the tree line and said nothing. They finished the morning hunt in silence. They came back to camp at noon. Carl and Gord were already there, cleaning their rifles, talking about the creek. Ray made lunch and told the story of a bear he'd seen on a hunt in the Upper Peninsula in 1968. Not the story of what he'd seen that morning, a different story, a true story that was also a cover story, a way of putting bears into the conversation, so that what he'd seen that morning had a container to live in. Dee ate his lunch and said nothing. He looked at Ray once across the fire. Ray did not look back. He told himself he would say something if it happened again. The second afternoon is the part of this account that Ray finds hardest to narrate. Not because of what happened. The second afternoon was ordinary, or appeared to be. What makes it hard is the knowledge it carries now. He knows, telling it, that for the entire second afternoon his three friends were operating with incomplete information. They were making decisions. Where to hunt, how far to range from camp, whether to split up or stay together, without knowing what he and Dee had seen that morning, and he let them. Carl went west alone after lunch, toward the stand he'd been building all season. A good stand, Carl said. Perfect sight lines. He'd be back by dark. Ray watched him go and thought about calling after him. He didn't. Gord stayed near camp, hunting the brushy edge of the clearing where the does came through in the late afternoon. He was maybe 200 yards from the tents, close enough to hear someone shout. Ray noticed that he was measuring the distance and made himself stop. Dee sat by the fire and sharpened his knife and didn't hunt that afternoon. Ray sat near him and they were quiet together. And it was the particular silence of two people who are having a conversation that neither of them has started yet. At some point, Dee said, "How far do you think it ranged?" Ray said, "Hard to say." Dee said, "You think it knows the camp is here?" Ray looked at the fire. He said, "All the big bears know everything in a 3-mile radius. That's how they are." Dee kept sharpening the knife. He said quietly, not looking up, "Ray, that wasn't a bear." Ray didn't answer. Dee said, "You know that." Ray didn't answer. He put more wood on the fire and watched it catch, and that was the end of that conversation. Carl came back at dusk. Gord came in 5 minutes later. They ate, they talked. The fire was good. Ray told himself again that he would say something if it happened again, and he drank enough that the decision felt less urgent, and he went to bed. In the morning, everything was different. Ray woke at 2 a.m. and the camp was dark. He lay there for a moment, oriented. His body told him something was wrong before his mind did. A cold that was different from the ambient cold. A quality to the darkness that wasn't right. He turned his head and looked through the mesh of his tent door. The fire was out. Not low, not coals. Out. Dark. The fire ring was a black circle against the slightly lighter ground, and there was nothing in it. Not a glow. Not an ember. The ash-gray absence of a fire that has been out for a very long time. Ray lay still and processed this. He had built the fire himself before bed. He was careful about fires. He always had been. Not from fear of the fire spreading, but because a good fire through the night was a practical matter in November in northern Michigan. He had put on enough wood for 4 hours. He knew what 4 hours of wood looked like. He had done it 12 years running. The fire had been burning for less than 2 hours when they went to bed. It should have burned until 4 a.m, minimum. It should have been coals, at worst. The kind of coals you can bring back with a breath and a stick. What was in the fire ring looked like a fire that had been out since yesterday. Ray counted sleeping bags through the tent mesh. 1, 2, 3, 4. All present, all occupied. The slow, deep breathing of 3 sleeping men. No one had been up. No one had tended the fire or let it die or in any way interacted with it since they went to bed. He lay still and he thought about the fire and he thought about the birch stand and he thought about Dee's words by the afternoon fire, and he held very still in his bag and he looked at the dark camp. Then he counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4 sleeping bags. He counted the shapes near the fire ring, the cooler, the pack frames leaning against the log, the stacked firewood. He counted again. There was a shape at the edge of the camp he hadn't placed yet. He lay there and he looked at it and he tried to assign it to something he knew. A pack, a bag of gear. The tarp they'd stacked against the birch on the north side. It was not any of those things. It was at the north edge of camp, at the boundary between the clearing and the tree line, and it was upright, and it was still, and it was approximately the height and proportion of what he had seen in the birch stand the morning before. It was standing with its back to the trees and its attention on the camp. He understood this the way you understand the direction of a person's attention even in the dark, even at a distance. It was watching. Ray lay perfectly still. He counted to 60. The shape did not move. He thought about the rifle propped against his tent wall. He thought about what Dee had said. He thought about Carl in his stand a quarter-mile west. Carl who had built his life on knowing this land. Carl who did not know what was standing at the north edge of camp right now. He did not reach for the rifle. He lay still and he watched the shape, and the shape watched the camp. And at some point, he cannot say exactly when because he fell asleep, which he has never fully forgiven himself for, the shape was no longer there. In the morning, the fire was still cold. The others noticed. Carl poked at the ash and said the fire must have choked on green wood. Gord said it was fine. They'd rebuild it. Dee looked at Ray. Ray looked at the north tree line. He said nothing. That night, one of them said they'd heard something move through camp after midnight. Large, deliberate. They assumed it was one of the others getting up to tend the fire. It was not. The evidence was there in the morning dew. Carl found it first, which was appropriate, because Carl had made it his business for 20 years to read this ground. He was walking the camp perimeter the way he always did at first light. Habit, not caution. The same circuit he'd done every morning for 12 years. And he stopped. He called the others over without raising his voice. That was the thing that got their attention. Carl was not a quiet voice man. Carl's bass line was a comfortable shout. He called them over in a voice they had never heard him use before, and they came. There was a path through the camp, not a path worn over time, a path visible in the heavy morning dew, the grass pressed down in a line of footfalls that entered the camp from the north tree line and moved between the tents with a precision that excluded accident. The impressions were not boot-shaped. They were like large, really large dog prints, and the spacing between them was too long. Not a normal dog or wolf stride, something longer, something with legs that covered more ground per step than any of the 4 men standing there, looking at it. The most disturbing thing was it walked on 2 legs, not 4, a realization. That makes you sick. The path came in from the north. It passed between Ray's tent and Dee's tent, close enough to brush either tent wall. It went around the far side of the cold fire ring. It passed between Carl's tent and the stacked gear on the south side, and it exited into the south tree line, straight through, clean, not wandering, not exploring, a direct path through the center of camp, between the sleeping men around the dead fire and out the other side. Carl crouched and put his fingers in one of the impressions. He didn't say anything. He looked at the impression for a long time, the way a person looks at something they are trying very hard to file under a known category and failing. Gord said, "What made that?" Carla, "I don't know." In 12 years, Carl had never said those 3 words about this land. Gord looked at Ray. Ray was staring at the north tree line. Dee was standing slightly apart from the others, and he was not looking at the path. He was looking at Ray. He had been waiting for this moment, watching it arrive, and now it was here, and Ray still hadn't said anything. And Dee's expression had moved past the fear that Gord was feeling and Carl was feeling into something quieter and more final. Dee already knew what it was. Dee had known since the birch stand, and Ray's silence had made Dee carry that alone for 2 days. And the 2 days were visible on him now, in the set of his jaw and the particular stillness of his eyes. Ray looked at the path, and then he looked at Dee. And Dee looked back at him, and nothing was said, but everything was communicated. Ray put his hands in his pockets. He said, "All right, I need to tell you something." He told them about the birch stand. He told it straight. What he'd seen. How long he'd stood there, the quality of the stillness, the way it had turned and walked, and the sound it had not made going into the trees. He told them about the fire and the shape at the north edge of camp and lying still in his bag counting. He did not embellish. He did not minimize. He told it the way a machinist describes a defect, with precision, because the precision was the only way he knew how to handle something that had no slot in any category he had. When he finished, the camp was quiet for a long time. Carl spoke first. Carl said, "You should have told us yesterday." Ray said, "I know." Carl, "You should have told us yesterday morning before I went to that stand alone." His voice was very controlled. Ray, "I know, I'm telling you now." Gord sat on the cooler and looked at the ground. He had his rifle across his knees, and he was gripping it in a way that had nothing to do with hunting. He said without looking up, "It walked through camp." Gord, "It walked between the tents. While we were sleeping, it came through and it looked at us and it left." He paused. Why did it leave? That was the question. Ray had been not asking it since 2 a.m, and here it was in the open, and it was worse in the open than it had been in his head, because in his head it was just a thought, but now it was a question that 4 people needed an answer to, and none of them had one. Dee said, "Because it wanted to." Everyone looked at him. It left because it decided to leave. It came through because it wanted to see. And it left because it had seen enough. That's all. His voice was flat, not frightened. Past frightened into something else. It knows we're here. It's known since the first day. I don't think it's deciding whether to act. I think it already decided. I think we're inside something that belongs to it, and it's letting us know that. Silence. Carl said, "We should go." Ray, "Today?" Carl, "Today." Gord, "I've got 1 more day of vacation." And then he stopped. He looked at the path in the dew, still visible in the cold morning light. The line of impressions that had passed 18 inches from where his head had been while he slept. He didn't finish the sentence. Ray looked at Dee. Dee was already looking at the tents, thinking about packing, He'd been ready to leave since the birch stand. The vote, when it happened, was not formal. It was just 4 men standing in a dew-wet clearing looking at a path something had made through the middle of their camp in the night, and one by one reaching the same conclusion. They did not argue. They did not talk themselves out of it or into it. They just packed. Carl was last to his truck. He stood at the edge of the clearing for a moment and looked at the land he had hunted for 12 years. And then he got in the truck and they drove south. And none of them looked back. In Michigan in 1938, a logging camp foreman called a meeting, and every single person voted to leave their equipment and their wages and their entire operation behind. Not one person argued for staying. That was 35 years before Carl stood at the edge of his clearing. Ray learned about the 1938 camp later, from the same researcher he wrote the letter to in 1991. When Ray read about the vote, he said he wasn't surprised. He said, when it's time to go, everybody knows at the same time. You don't have to say much. They had agreed, after Ray's account, to leave in the morning. One more night. Carl said the light was wrong for packing and driving the 2-track, which was true, and they all accepted it. And none of them said what they were also thinking, that leaving in daylight felt safer, that the dark, after what they knew now, was a different thing. The 3rd night, nobody slept. They didn't discuss this. They just didn't sleep. The fire was rebuilt and kept high, higher than necessary, the fire of people who want light and have stopped pretending the light is for warmth. They sat around it in their camp chairs, rifles across their laps, and talked about Carl's brother's new truck, a movie Gord's wife had wanted him to see. Ordinary things said in ordinary voices. The conversation of men who are trying to fill the silence before the silence fills them. At some point after midnight, the conversation stopped. Not because anyone decided to stop. Because the woods stopped first. The insects were gone. The wind was gone. The small animal sounds that had been constant background noise for 3 days. The mice, the squirrels, the distant owls, the random percussion of November in the northern woods. All of it was gone. All at once, like a switch thrown. The 4 of them sat around the fire in a silence that was not natural, that was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that excluded sound, and they looked at each other across the fire, and they did not speak. Gord's hand tightened on his rifle. Carl looked north. He looked a long time at the dark tree line, and then he looked south, then east, then west. Slow, methodical, the way Carl did everything. He was taking inventory. He was checking the perimeter with his eyes, the way a person checks the locks before bed. Ray counted. 1, Ray. 2, Gord. 3, Carl. 4, D. He counted the firelit shapes around the camp. The 4 chairs, the 4 rifles, the gear, the tents behind them, empty now since nobody was sleeping. He counted again. There was something at the edge of the firelight, at the absolute limit of where the light reached, where the illuminated ground met the dark. There was a shape, upright, still, not in the trees, standing at the border of the firelight, as though testing the edge of it, as though it had come as close as it intended to come. Ray said very quietly, "Don't anyone look north." Gord looked north. They sat in the firelight and they looked at it, and it stood at the boundary of the light and looked at them. And nobody moved for what felt like a very long time, and was probably 30 seconds. Nobody raised a rifle. Nobody spoke. They sat in their chairs with their rifles across their knees, and they were 4 people, and it was one thing and the firelight was between them, and the firelight was the only reason any of them could point to for why the distance held. Then Dee reached forward and put another log on the fire. Slowly, deliberately. No sudden movement. He picked up a log from the pile beside his chair and placed it on the fire and sat back. The fire brightened. The circle of light expanded by a foot, maybe 2. The shape stepped back, exactly as much as the light had expanded, maintaining the distance, staying at the edge. Dee reached for another log. Ray put his hand on Dee's arm and stopped him. They sat there the rest of the night without moving, without speaking, without adding to the fire, watching it burn down incrementally and watching the shape at the edge of the light hold its position. When the first gray light came into the sky from the east, the shape was gone. Nobody said anything about it while they packed. This is the part Ray does not tell often. He has told the birch stand story. He has told the fire story. He told the path through camp story in the letter to the researcher in 1991, and the researcher published it, and it went into the record. But this part, what happened in the hours between the shape at the firelight and the gray dawn, Ray has spoken about only twice. And both times he stopped himself in the middle and said he needed to think about whether he was telling it right. He does not think he was ever telling it right. But here is what he said. Somewhere around 3 a.m, the fire burned low, the shape still at the edge of the light, the 4 of them sitting in their chairs in silence. Ray counted again. He did it automatically, the way he'd been doing it since the second night. A habit now, a compulsion. Count the group. 1, himself. 2, Gord in the chair to his left. 3, Carl across the fire. 4, Dee to his right. He looked at the shape at the edge of the firelight. 5, he counted again. Himself, Gord, Carl, Dee. The shape at the north. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He sat with this for a moment. Then he turned slowly and looked behind his chair. There was a shape at the south edge of camp. At the edge of the firelight on the south side, the same distance from the fire as the northern shape, the same upright stillness. It had been there for some time. Ray cannot say how long. He had been watching the north. He had not been watching the south. 2 of them, 1 to the north, 1 to the south. The 4 men between them, at the fire in the chairs. Ray looked at Dee. Dee was looking south. Dee had been looking south for some time. Dee had been watching the south one and not saying anything, the same way Ray had been watching the north one and not saying anything. The 2 of them sitting on either side of the group and watching in opposite directions while Gord and Carl faced the fire and didn't know. Ray and Dee looked at each other across the space between their chairs. Ray opened his mouth. Dee shook his head. Barely. One small definitive movement. Don't. Ray understood this. He understood it the way Dee had understood it from the beginning. The way the knowledge had lived in Dee's body for 2 days before it lived in Ray's. That telling the others was not going to change what was happening, was not going to alter the positions of anything in this camp, was only going to take 2 more people, yet who were sitting still and make them move suddenly. And moving suddenly in the dark between 2 things that had demonstrated they could maintain perfect stillness for hours seemed like the worst possible idea. So Ray closed his mouth. And they sat there, the 4 of them, with 2 shapes at the border of the light on opposite sides, and they watched the fire burn, and they did not speak, and they did not move. And at dawn the shapes were gone. And they packed. And they drove south. Ray did not tell Carl and Gord about the second shape until 1987, 14 years later, at a dinner at Carl's house that was the last time the four of them were in a room together. He is not sure why he waited 14 years. He says it felt like information that needed time before it was safe to release. He says he's not sure it was ever safe to release. Carl listened to him tell it. At the end, Carl pushed his chair back from the table and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So there were two?" Ray said, "At least two." Carl said, "At least." They didn't talk about it after that. Carl died in 1994. He never went back to Osceola County. There is a photograph from the morning of the third day. You have seen it described. You know what it shows. What it shows has not changed in 50 years. The shape in the tree line behind Dee's right shoulder is upright. It is the height of the shape Ray saw in the birch stand. It is the height of the shape that held the border of the firelight. It is approximately the height of the shape that stood at the south edge of camp in the last hours of the last night and watched the four men sitting at the fire, while Dee and Ray watched it from their chairs and said nothing. Four men came home from Osceola County in November of 1973. Ray stopped hunting. Not that season. He never hunted again. He sold his rifles in 1974 and hasn't been to the woods overnight since. He says there is no version of the woods that is just the woods anymore. He says it is not a place he can go and be purely present. There is always something else in it now. Gord hunted for 3 more years, closer to home, in groups, never overnight. Then he stopped. He told his daughters it was his knees. Carl went back once in 1976. He told Ray on the phone that he drove out to the 2-track and sat in the truck at the edge of the clearing for 40 minutes and did not get out. He drove home. He never told Ray why he went back. He never told anyone what he was looking for or what he found or what he felt sitting in that truck at the edge of that clearing with the engine running. Dee has never spoken publicly. His family confirms he is alive and well and declines to comment further. He has not responded to any of the researchers who have contacted him over the years. In 1979, one of the 4 men, Ray, will not say which one, was going through an old box and found the photograph from the morning of the third day. He studied it for a long time. Then he closed the box and put it in the attic. He does not know who told the others about the shape in the trees. He thinks maybe nobody told them. He thinks maybe they all found it the same way alone years later, in their own attics, in their own time, and held it the same way, quietly, and without calling anyone. There were 4 of them when they went in. There were 4 of them when they came out. The count is never what it was.